this video, I'm going to show you how to install our chassis mounted splitter on a MK8 GTI. So we'll see that we have a left and a right. These are going to be bent in opposite directions. Our quick release goes on the outside. It's going to go in here like this. We're going to remount these two holes. We'll reuse this one and we'll have to drill one more down here. We're going to have to remove the horn to get that out of the way. We'll relocate that later. To start, you're going to use a M10 triple square to pull this bolt that holds the horn bracket on. And you just hang this out of the way. Just don't lose that bolt. For this, we're going to drill this in two different steps. You'll see the front hole is round, the rear hole is slightly slotted. To make sure that we get that round hole drilled out at the correct position, we're going to use this as the template. So we're basically going to drill this first hole, mount the bracket on to hold it there. We'll get the front situated where it needs to go, and then use this as a guide to drill out that rear hole in the correct position. We're using a riv nut here, so we got to drill to a specific size. Go with a 13.5mm drill bit. 10mm is also good to have. If you don't have one of these, you can use the US equivalent. And then a step bit. That's going to make it easier to get up roughly to our final size, and then we'll use the 13.5 to ream it to the proper size for the riv nut. What I'm going to start with now is the front hole. I'm going to start drilling that out until I get close to my final size, that 13.5. So I'll use the step bit first. I'll go all the way through. That only goes up to 12, and then we can jump up to the 13.5. That'll make drilling that much larger hole a lot easier. If this is your first time cutting steel, you want to do a slow speed on your drill. Use some sort of lubrication, so a WD-40 works fine. If you have cutting fluid or tapping fluid, that works too. You're going to spray a little bit on there, a little bit on the drill bit. That'll keep it cool. It's important to keep the drill bit cool. If it gets hot, you're going to start potentially heat hardening this, and it's going to make it even harder to get through. So again, we're going to start with the step bit. Again, use some sort of lubrication. I like this Anchor Lube stuff, but if you only have WD-40, use that. Something is better than nothing. I'm going to go on the first speed on this drill, regular drill, not impact. So I have my 13.5. Again, I dipped it in the lubricant. Now before I put this one in, we do want to clean up the burr on there. I'm going to use a burr tool because I have it. If you don't have one of these, next best thing would be a countersunk bit. If you have another drill bit that's even larger, you can use that. Just spin it 2 or 3 times. It gets rid of the surface burr. That's going to allow the riv nut to sit completely flush to this and bite in harder. I'm going to use some isopropyl just to clean this up again. Get all the cutting fluid or WD off of there. And then we should do touch-up paint. So we drilled steel. We're leaving a raw edge there. We don't want any rust to start. This stuff works fine. It's a paint and primer 2-in-1. Rust-Oleum. Krylon makes a similar thing. You can spray some of this in the cap and then use a paintbrush to apply it. You're just going to go around there. We just want to get the exposed metal. We'll do one coat, let it sit for 10 minutes just to flash off and dry, and then do a second coat. That'll just make sure that we're not creating a problem. So we put 2 coats of touch-up paint on that front hole. What we're going to do next is install our first riv nut. You can use a manual one like this. This is a Forevitol, I don't know, some brand I found on Amazon. I'll leave a link to that. It's actually worked pretty good. It has a lot of sizes. But we set a lot of riv nuts here, so I got a pneumatic one. We're going to install our bracket now. This is one of the M10 bolts. We'll just throw that in the front. Now to set, you'll see we have some movement here. We're going to put this one on the angled portion here. So you're going to grab an M8 bolt, steel flange head, and then the non-nylock nut. This is just for assembly. You're going to stick this in. You're going to have to reach underneath to get the nut on the back side. This is just going to keep the bracket in the right position as far as the tilt goes while we drill that rear hole. So I'm just going to do that hand tight. That'll be fine. All right, now we can drill this rear one. This is where the 10mm drill bit comes in, or the US equivalent. We're going to use the template, or the bracket as a template, to make sure that we remount this hole in the correct position for the riv nut. So again, I'm going to use some cutting fluid, anchor loop, WD, whatever you got. I'm going to drill that top one out. With that started, we can now remove the bracket again. We'll have to drill out up to that 13.5 again. Bracket removed, we can now step that rear hole up to our 13.5. I'll jump back to the step bit. Again, lubricate it, slow speed, and we'll ream it again up to 13.5. This is not really a reamer, but reamers are expensive, so we're using a drill bit to effectively ream this hole. Same deal as we did on the front. We'll clean this up, use some isopropyl just to get any grease off of there, and then we can do our touch-up paint again. I've let that touch-up paint sit for 15 minutes so it's dry. I'll insert our rear riv nut here. One thing, if you're doing this with a pneumatic tool or with the hand tool, occasionally these riv nuts will partially set, and then you'll find that, that feels like it's in there. You want to make sure that the threaded portion is pulling all the way up against the inside wall. So the midsection is supposed to collapse fully. That's what creates the pressure and sets the ribs on the back side of the riv nut into the material. If you don't do that, there's a chance of them spinning over time. So you just want to make sure that you crimp it, take a look at it. If it needs to be crimped again, reset, thread it back in all the way, and then crimp again. I have my 2 bolts up top reinstalled, as well as the M8 here. That's just clamping this bracket to the impact bar at this angled portion. I'm using the non-nylock nut, so I don't have to use a wrench to get that on and off, because again, this is going to have to come off one more time. We're going to use this front hole as our position. You want to make sure that you're drilling straight, vertically, and left-right. I just start it like that. We'll remove the bracket, and then you can start drilling through all the way. With the bracket removed, you can see our mark transferred over. So that last hole is a 6mm or 1/4 inch, whatever you got. That one's a lot more of a common size, so we don't include that one. You will get the 13.5 and the step bit with the kit. Now that we have all of our holes and riv nuts set, you can do final assembly on here. Your top 2 are going into a riv nut. We don't have a nylock or anything for those, so I would use blue Loctite there. Start by just getting them tight to the part, but you see we still have a little bit of wiggle there because we got to get this front one in. At this point you could swap to that nylock nut for this one because this shouldn't come off again. And the last one's going to be the long M6 bolt. It's got a pan head on it and then a spacer. This will probably be silver with your kit. That's going to go between the bracket and the impact bar. You'll see that there's a gap there. You might have to pull the bracket out a little bit to get it in. And this one will also have a nylock nut. With all 4 of these bolts in place, we can now torque these. Just wanted to show one more time where all your hardware is going to land. We have the 2 M10 bolts with the riv nuts. You have the M8 bolt here, heads on the outside. The nut is accessible if you reach from below up into there. And then the M6 bolt is here, that's the pan head. You have the spacer between the bracket and the impact bar. And again, you can reach the inside of that from below. And that's also a nylock nut. So these 2 I would thread lock. These 2 are nylocks. You don't need any additional thread lock on those. You can obviously jump back and forth That'll let you drill your first hole, do your paint touch-up, work on the other side, drill your first hole, paint touch-up, come back over here, work on the back. Then you're not waiting around for paint to dry. We removed our horn bracket in a previous step. We got to reinstall the horn though. So we include an angle bracket. This is going to have two different hole sizes on it. You got a 6mm hole and then a slightly oversized 8mm. I did one more revision on these. So when you get your kit, the bracket for the horn is going to have a Preston nut on it already. And then your horn's going to mount on this tab. You still have the ability to rotate this. You'll see in the video that I specify the orientation for that. So still follow those steps, but this just makes the install a little bit easier. The 8mm goes to the stud on the horn. You want to tighten this one in place before you install this because you're not going to have access to it. Orientation of this is important. The left and right side of the car are going to be slightly different because we have different stuff in the way to work around. We got to put our horn back in this cavity here because this portion is filled with the fog light when that goes back in place. So I'll show you this from a couple angles. We see the opening of the horn is at the bottom here, the plug sticking up. The bracket's going to come in at roughly a 45, and this is going to sit here. We're going to go on the outside of the bracket on the passenger side. This is also going to sit at a slight angle because we need access for this plug here. If you go perpendicular, you're going to interfere with the stud where the factory horn was mounted. So I'll get this bolted on and then we'll plug it back in. So that's ready to go. Last thing we'll have to reconnect is the fog light when we get the bumper back in place. I'll show you the driver's side next. On the driver's side, we have more stuff in the way. We got the SAI pump, the washer fluid bottle. So our area is a lot smaller. The harness on this side for the horn is also a lot shorter. So this one is a little bit trickier to get in there. If you're looking at this straight on here, something like that, you could see the whole white stud when you're looking at it, but this edge is coming up close. So that's the orientation we want. Again, tighten this first. We're gonna plug this in before we slide it in. And then you can snake this in there. This bracket's gonna go on the inside of our vertical bracket. Put our bolt in. Now you'll see you have a little bit of range of motion here to lift it up and down. You want to center it between the bracket and the SAI pump bracket. You don't want it touching either thing, so just kind of get a feel for that and then find center, and then you're going to tighten that. Once that's done, the last thing's going to be our fog light connector. So that'll go on when the bumper goes on, and then our connector for the front sensors if your car has that. Just to show you what everything's going to look like once it comes back together, we have the subframe panel that's notched, the fender liner that has the corner cut out, and then the bumper tray where we did the notch also. As you can see, the bracket just comes through there. Rest of the bracket's going to sit below all of this. You can see some other holes and stuff in this bumper cover. This car had a different lip on it previously, so that's what the extra holes are. This is the only modification we're going to be doing for the install of these brackets. If you want to run the factory subframe panel with the splitter, you'll need to do a little bit of trimming for the bracket clearance. So you'll see here's our clips that go into the core support. This is going back under the engine. On the side here where the fender liners go, you can see our fender liner holes here. We're going to cut just this corner out, and we're just going to use the edge. I just run a marker along that crease where the plastic starts to dip down vertical and then meet. I'm going to use that as my line, and then I'm going to come around this portion. It looks like a giant backwards C. You're going to do that on both sides. So you'll see I have it marked on this side too. Same position. We're just cutting out that C shape in the front. We're going to retain all of our fender liner screws. After cutting that, I'll just get rid of my paint marker using some isopropyl alcohol, and I can clean that up with a file. I would probably nip off this corner too, just because it's sharp. We can call that done. We'll repeat on the other side as well. We're looking at the inside of the bumper here. We got to notch out a section so that the bracket can come through. You can see that we have the fog light here off to the side. We're gonna start with this bottom portion here, we're going to mark 80 millimeters from this inside edge over, make a mark here. If you look at this clip that comes down and touches the lower tray, we'll go from that corner 65 millimeters over, make another mark, and then connect those two dots. That'll give you this left portion. If you don't want to measure it, you're basically bisecting this circle that's embossed in the tray, and then you're just keeping it at a 90-degree angle from here. So you could use a square, just bisect that. This doesn't have to be perfect. We're going to go from that straight line we cut to the corner of that clip that touches the tray. We'll follow that, use that as your edge contour for this portion. And then from that point, we're coming back and we're just staying parallel to this edge we already cut. So that's going to be 140 millimeters over. Again, you could kind of eyeball this using this corner of where the clip starts to taper away. We're going to come straight back, and then you could check yourself 140 millimeters from that edge we cut over. That'll give you this dimension here, and this is the 3 cuts we're making. We're going to repeat this on both sides of the tray. One of the last things we got to trim here is the fender liner. We already trimmed the bumper cover. We're basically transferring that cut mark that we have here back. Easiest way to mark that is you have the tire diffuser sitting here. We're going to use the inside edge of that, so that's where my green line is here. We're going to go back until the fender liner starts to bump out. You'll see that we kind of hit a point right here. Hopefully you can see that. And then I'm just going to come in at a 90 and strike that line. So I'm going to remove that little section there, and when we put this back in place, we'll see that that's going to allow this to sit up where it should be and give the clearance we need for the inside of the bracket. I believe the last thing we got to trim or remove here is the wind deflector that goes under the in front of the tire here. I got this one removed so you can see the clips. We got a row of clips on the back. The tab is on the front, so you can either stick a pick tool up in there and push it back, or if you reach inside the fender liner, you can use a pick tool from the inside, pull the slot forward, and then slide the clip out. I found it was easiest to pull from the inside and then work your way across. You got 2 on the front edge, 3 across the back. The screw in this corner goes between the bumper, fender liner, and this, so you got to make sure that that's removed, otherwise you're going to get stuck there. We'll do the same thing on the other side. If you don't want to remove this, you can just trim it. You got to trim about 3/4 of an inch off of it, but honestly the clips come out pretty easily. I think it's easier to just remove this piece on both sides. One last thing you want to do before you reinstall your bumper is we're going to add a zip tie around this part of the bracket. That's just going to tuck the release cable to the bracket so that it doesn't interfere with the fog light. This is just going to tuck that part out of the way, and then I'll show you up the top here. When you install the quick release pull cable on the top, this bracket you want just to be in this orientation. The stud coming off the bottom should be making contact with the sheet metal under here. That's just going to be so that when we pull this, it's going to already have a hard stop there. It's not going to rotate this bracket. We'll do the same thing on this side also. That wraps up the install for the upper bracket.